Good morning and welcome to Rising. We have a great show for you today. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
How you doing?
Great. I'm excited for the new year, actually.
Me too. We talked about it in the makeup room how we both don't have resolutions.
Yeah,
we kind of
don't do
just
that.
have good intentions for the year and pray and hope for the best, right?
Exactly. Yeah, we went to New Year's Day Mass, the Solemnity of Mary, and, set some intentions up there, and hopefully they work out.
Yeah, I think that everyone wants good intentions for the government also. So let's hope that they have
Exactly.
some good plans for us all.
Indeed. And coming up on Rising, in a new interview with the Wall Street Journal, President Trump insisted that he is in good health and offered new details about a screening that he underwent.
Plus, Affordable Care Act subsidies have now expired, which means premiums will spike for millions of Americans.
And President Trump has decided to remove National Guard troops from select Democratic-run cities. But first up, Lindsey, what's in your lens?
Let's talk about it. So yesterday, New York City made history, and not in a quiet, symbolic way, but in a way that felt immediately like it tested what power is supposed to do. Zohran Mamdani was sworn in, becoming the youngest mayor New York has had in more than a century, and the first Muslim, first South Asian, and first African-born mayor to lead the largest city in the country. At 34 years old, with his hands on a Quran, Mamdani didn't just break barriers. He walked straight into one of the hardest jobs in American municipal politics with a very clear message. Expectations are not getting lowered. Standing outside of City Hall in the cold, Mamdani spoke directly to skeptics, supporters, and everyone in between, making it clear he understands the distrust people feel towards politics right now. And then he said this.
I stand alongside over 1 million New Yorkers who voted for this day nearly 2 months ago. And I stand just as resolutely alongside those who did not. I know there are some who view this administration with distrust or disdain, or who see politics as permanently broken. And while only action can change minds, I promise you this. If you are a New Yorker, I am your mayor.
That line matters because Mamdani knows symbolism won't carry him. Action has to. And he wasted no time. Moments after being sworn in, Mamdani signed 3 housing executive orders aimed at protecting tenants and accelerating housing construction across the city. He moved to revitalize the mayor's office to protect tenants and launched 2 new task forces focused on increasing supply, building on his campaign promise to freeze rents and tackle affordability head on. This isn't theoretical government. It's immediate. For students and young New Yorkers who showed up for him in huge numbers, the expectations are concrete. Expanded tuition assistance for education degrees, potential transit discounts or limited no-fare pilot programs, increased funding for community colleges and stronger advocacy for city universities. About 3/4 of the voters under 30 backed Mamdani. Now he has to keep them engaged. Of course, this mayoralty won't exist in a vacuum. He'll have to work with state leaders to accomplish these big ideas. He'll have to work with the federal government too. And remember, during Mamdani's campaign, President Trump called Mamdani an extremist, quote, lunatic, threatened to withhold federal funding, and even suggested he'd arrest Mamdani if he interfered with immigration enforcement. And yet, Trump later invited him to the White House, and after that meeting said, quote, I want him to do a great job and will help him do a great job. I'm hopeful that temporary truce will last, but even if it doesn't, it underscores just how seriously Mamdani is already being taken. At its core, this win sends a message Democrats really can't ignore. Mamdani ran a bold, unapologetic campaign centered on affordability, housing, and using government power to help working people. And he won. Not by running from ideology, but by offering a clear vision of what life could look like if government actually showed up. Now, this isn't just a New York story, and if Democrats are paying attention, they'll stop calling wins like this an anomaly and start treating them more like a roadmap.
All right, so definitely interesting swearing-in ceremony. I did want to point out, did you hear Letitia James totally bungle his name when she was...
I think she probably was like a big moment. Everybody was looking at
that
her.
Was tough. That was tough. Look, I think there's going to be a real test of socialist policies, collectivist policies under Mamdani. and whether or not his idea, his vision for housing policy will actually make things more affordable, or if government intervention leads to things being more expensive. Now, I appreciate that he did focus on the supply side of housing in those initial mayoral orders, executive orders, I suppose, which is important because the demand for housing has obviously increased significantly in major cities like New York, and you can't just freeze rent without increasing the supply and expect that that's going to make things better when you have this massive demand surge. So we'll see how it all works out. I think this will be a good test for the Democrats' progressive agenda.
I noticed another thing that he did was one of the executive orders was going to directly look into the people that, are like landlords that aren't doing a good job. And one of those people are Pinnacle Realty, which owns, I believe, has more than 5,000 violations across the city and 14,000 different tenant complaints. And they're in the middle of filing bankruptcy right now. And Mamdani in this executive order is like, not so fast. You need to make sure that these things are situated before you kind of get out of this, scot-free and say, oh, we're bankrupt, we can't do anything about it. There's a lot of people that are dealing with landlords like that Mamdani feels like they're getting the shorter end of the stick. Things like don't have the water hot when it needs to be, don't have cracks fixed. And he talked about and to those people in his speech and said, listen, somebody has to protect you and let the government start to do that. And so while a lot of people were frustrated with Mamdani for maybe overpromising and we haven't seen what he's able to deliver, I think the fact that he started with those executive orders and is trying to directly pursue what people voted for him for, it'll be a test, like you said, to watch what he's actually able to accomplish. I mean, Governor Hochul obviously is rerunning to be the governor again, so I don't know that she can just take on his full agenda and have the support of all of New York, because even though Manhattan and the city and surrounding boroughs are very blue leaning, a lot of the rest of the state of New York has mixed feelings about some of the policies that Mamdani had, which is why there was a back and forth about him being the underdog and rising to the place that he's at. But I do think that just for the fact that he's trying to move forward and implementing policy, that's what people are looking to. So when I talk about the Democrats as a wider party looking at him, it doesn't mean that, everybody in every city needs to follow this blueprint and be as progressive leaning as Mamdani. It means that Democrats forgot to speak to the average working American, and that's been repeated over and over again. Democrats have somehow become the party that talks to just college graduates and people with money, and somehow this took over the party that was the party of the working class. And no matter what majority of the country is of working or middle class. And so they need to get back and figure out what messages land. And obviously Mamdani's landed. And they're very actually similar to the messages of President Trump. Even if they have different strategies towards helping the same people, they spoke to the same issues. And so they have to remember that going into the midterms.
Yeah, I think my bigger concern for New York is actually more about how he's going to handle crime. He's appointed a few people to his cabinet that are big criminal justice reform advocates, and he has suggested sending in social workers to handle domestic violence calls. And then the free bus issue, I wouldn't be surprised if we see buses turn into roving insane asylums under Mamdani. But look, let's be real, right? Like, even if it's $1, fare to get on a bus it creates a barrier to entry for people who don't have good intentions. And just like anecdotally, when I was living in Pentagon City, I was accosted at a bus stop, and the only reason that guy wasn't able to follow me on the bus is because he didn't have a fare, and the bus driver was able to kick him off. And so I think as we see crime issues in New York over the past few years since the pandemic, that's an area where I think New Yorkers are going to learn very quickly that progressive approach isn't going to work.
Yeah, we're going to have to keep following. I know the MTA did a test run of this, and they said that there was a 32% reduction in assaults on specific bus operators when they tried this free run program. So I know that's not the people on the bus, that's the actual drivers, but we'll have to keep following it.
We will. All right, up next, a Wall Street Journal interview with President Trump is shedding new light about the state of the president's health. We'll take a look at it after the break. Conversations about President Trump's health are stirring up once again following an interview with the Wall Street Journal that's been getting a lot of traction. The report raises concerns about possible signs of aging from Trump as he approaches his 80th birthday.
And it says the president doesn't always follow the advice of his doctors. The article reads in part, quote, President Trump is taking more aspirin than his doctors recommend. He briefly tried wearing compression socks for his swelling ankles, but stopped because he didn't like them. And he regrets undergoing advanced imaging because it generated scrutiny of his health. It continues, quote, Trump gets little sleep and has recently struggled to keep his eyes open during several televised events in the West Wing. Aides, donors, and friends say they have often have to speak loudly in meetings with the president because he strains to hear. Aside from golf, Trump doesn't get regular exercise, and he is known to consume a diet of heavy on salty and fatty foods, such as hamburgers and French fries.
The article also says that Trump has described some of his recent medical care inaccurately. Trump claimed he underwent an MRI in October, but Trump and his doctor told the Wall Street Journal that he actually underwent a CT scan. The process for the two procedures is similar, but the CT scan is typically much faster. Trump told the Journal that in hindsight, he wishes he hadn't gotten the scan because he feels it gave people reason to raise concerns about his health.
But those concerns don't seem to be slowing down, as the report has generated a lot of online reactions. Liberal influencer Harry Sassone writes, quote, MAGA talked about Biden's health for 4 years, but after this bombshell Wall Street Journal article came out about Trump's health, which revealed he takes 4 times the daily recommended dose of aspirin and still eats like blank, they're silent. Wonder why? And journalist Aaron Rupar says, quote, despite all the obvious lying, if this piece is meant to dispel concerns about Trump's health, it actually does the opposite. This is not a guy who's taking care of himself at 79 years old.
Despite the concerns, Trump and his doctors still assert that the president is in excellent health. Trump turns 80 in June and will surpass Joe Biden as the oldest president in American history by the end of his second term.
So, you know what, for President Trump, I don't think you get an opportunity to make age in regards to Biden a central point of your campaign and of bashing him, and then be like almost annoyed when people are asking you, the oldest president to ever be sworn in, at these questions. I think these are real questions. And it's not a matter of whether he had an MRI or CT scan or what's going on. It's a matter of the transparency and the fact that he and Caroline Levitt have like different answers when people are asking, or ignore the fact that he is falling asleep in meetings and saying, oh, I just am having a long blink. Like, people are watching you like kind of, you know, we're watching the video. And it's also really something that we've known since his first term, when he had McDonald's in the Oval Office, is that he doesn't eat that well. And naturally, as somebody who has elderly people in their family, and anybody who can relate to this, is like, you don't want your grandpa, who's almost 80, eating McDonald's and French fries every day. You know that that is not good accommodation for somebody, especially someone who doesn't exercise or have a regimen that seems like it makes sense to take the best care of yourself. And so with all these things coming out, I think naturally it's normal for the press and anyone else concerned about 3 more years of a presidency to say, hey, what's going on? Not to mention the bruise on the hand and the leg swelling, all the different things that have come up that just kind of get swept to the side like, oh, you guys are being dramatic.
Well, I think the difference is that it really wasn't about Biden's age so much as it was a very evident cognitive decline that we saw happen from both the campaign and then throughout his presidency, that got to the point that even Democrats were acknowledging that Biden was not well, that he was forgetting things very easily during debate prep. He was often confused and didn't really understand what they were doing. And so I think there is actually a significant difference between recognizing someone is old and overweight versus seeing actually a cognitive decline that is very evident in the way that the president spoke, in the way that his advisors were handling a lot of meetings, and his wife was sitting in for him on cabinet meetings, despite her being the first lady and not the president. I think it's pretty evident that Trump doesn't obviously take great care of himself with eating the McDonald's. I do think people discount how much exercise golf is actually, but that's a separate issue. But yeah, I don't think those two things are comparable at all.
Well, I think with the fitness to lead, specifically from Trump, he has criticized Joe Biden and being like Sleepy Joe, things that are dealing with age, talked about his age definitely directly over the few years. And so even outside of age, some of these things like taking aspirin to thin your blood even more because you don't want it to be too thick, because you don't want to have issues down the line, telling people that it's an MRI when it's a CT scan and people want to know what's going on. Like, there's no clarity around how healthy you are. These things could possibly all be nothing, but in the event that they are something much deeper than we're being told, that means people need to prepare for President J.D. Vance. And I think that's something that the country should be made aware of. And I think that's a legitimate concern, to not actually just say, wow, he's not exactly like Biden, because I agree. Biden and the entire book that came out around his health and cognitive decline, I think we should put the issue to bed because he's no longer president. But that doesn't take away the fact that I think it was wrong that Jill Biden took so much power in that situation and decided basically what the fate of the Democratic Party was going to be, because she so vehemently wanted to protect her husband. But still, at the same time, I think any president moving forward and the nation as a whole can be concerned about the health of their president and say, what's going on? Is there going to be transparency here, especially for an administration that was so critical around transparency, and even brings up the fact that they think, a lot of people in the administration, that Biden had cancer or knew about this diagnosis prior to disclosing it. I mean, these are all specific health related things, which you think would make the administration want to be more open about exactly what's going on. And then all the conversation could go away. It wouldn't be back and forth. We would just know the answer.
I mean, to be fair, though, it's not like Joe Biden ever sat down with the Wall Street Journal and discussed aspects of his health, right? And so we already have more transparency just from this interview than we did throughout the entire 4 years of the Biden administration, where there was an active cover-up involved, where his doctor was not releasing much information about the president's health, if any at all, Dr. Kevin O'Connor. And then we also learned that Dr. O'Connor never recommended that Biden get a CT scan or an MRI or a cognitive exam, even though the recommended guidance from every independent doctor who's looked at this said that he should have had that done, especially at his age and with some of the concerning things that he saw. So just comparing, Trump openly answering questions about his health and, yes, downplaying aspects of his age, as 80-year-olds are wont to do, right? Compared to whatever we saw over the 4 years of Biden, where we were constantly insisted upon that Biden was outrunning his younger staffers, that nobody could keep up with him. Like, it was ridiculous.
I think Biden shouldn't be the standard, though. I guess that's what I'm arguing. Is that
I agree, but I think it's the problem of the hypocrisy of people who were either actively involved in the cover-up or dismissed concerns about Biden's health to now be like, well, Trump's going to die in office. It's like, well, come on, you guys don't really have any credibility here, right?
Yeah, and I'll say that I was not one of those people.
I know.
Right? So that's why it's hard for me to say that this, using him as a standard. But I also understand there were a lot of people that I think had almost pie in their face when they look at the situation and the book that came out over the last year and really got to understand what was happening, saw his interview on The View and how Joe Biden basically had to speak for him in that interview. And I think there's probably a lot of empathy there for anybody who's dealt with people dealing with a lot of health issue, getting older, having older people in your family, and then also dealing with cancer now. You kind of just want to say, okay, just let him enjoy this part of his life. But I understand there's critical thoughts around it. But the idea is that it doesn't happen again. The idea is that an administration that was so critical doesn't happen again, and that we have younger presidents moving forward. Like,
anybody who's 80 years old is going to have health issues, and that's always a concern when you're talking about the presidency. And I don't think it's shocking that Trump is not like the perfect specimen of health either.
Right. So Affordable Care Act subsidies have expired, launching millions of Americans into 2026 with steep insurance hikes. We're going to talk about that next. Don't go anywhere. Affordable Care Act subsidies that lower monthly insurance premiums for millions of Americans have expired.
ACA subsidies or premium tax credits help lower or eliminate the out-of-pocket cost of monthly premiums for those who purchase coverage through the ACA marketplace.
Now, Congress had until December 31st, 2025 to strike a deal to end the tax credits. The Biden administration first enacted the credits during the COVID-19 pandemic, further extending them through the Inflation Reduction Act.
ACA subsidies became a sticking point during the longest government shutdown in U.S. history in October and November of 2025. Republicans said the expansions from the pandemic era went too far and supported funding a temporary spending bill that didn't include the expiring ACA subsidies.
Meanwhile, Democrats insisted on extending the premium tax credits as part of a bill to end the shutdown. House Minority Whip Catherine Clark wrote in a post on X Wednesday, quote, "Millions will see their premiums skyrocket because Republicans refuse to act. You deserve better, and Democrats will keep fighting to lower costs."
An analysis by healthcare research nonprofit KFF found that on average, more than 20 million subsidized enrollees are in the Affordable Care Act program would see their premium costs rise by 114% in 2026. Well, another congressional failure. We've talked before about how ineffective Congress has been. In fact, there was a research study done at the end of the year that found this was the least effective Congress in terms of passing legislation in American history. They seem to break that record every single year.
They broke that record
right?
last year for
They
sure.
did, yeah, and then they broke it again this year. And I don't think either of the plans that were offered were in any way compromises or particularly useful to the American people. I mean, the Democratic plan was to extend the ACA subsidies for 3 years, which the subsidies were introduced in the American Rescue Plan, as we mentioned, which was voted for entirely along party lines. So Democrats were the ones that proposed these subsidies expiring at the end of 2025 in the first place. And then all of a sudden, when they could blame it on Republicans, they wanted Republicans to take the heat for the subsidies expiring. And then on the Republican side, their solution was to offer people, I think it was like $1,200 in a health savings account, which is not even close to comparable to the amount of that people were getting to cover their health care in subsidies. And also HSAs are a different mechanism when it comes to paying for premiums, right? These are things that can be used, it's tax-free money that you can spend on health services, but if you still have a $3,000 a month premium, that's not really helping you out that much. And so I think both plans were real stinkers, and nobody has really offered a comprehensive solution to what has clearly become the Unaffordable Care Act.
Yeah, and I think ultimately broader reform is needed, and that requires Democrats and Republicans to figure out what the health plan is. I mean, ever since Obamacare was proposed, it's been like a no from Republicans, but understanding that the healthcare system needs to be reformed and that people weren't going to get health care. That was the other option. And just to really go into who this diverse group of people that are represented by the Affordable Care Act is people that make a little bit too much money to get Medicare or to get covered in those ways. And so there's like this in between that don't get insurance to qualify for Medicare or Medicaid. And some of them are self-employed workers. Some of them are small business owners. Some of them have to get their small business staff health insurance and want to keep them employed. And I think that it's at their own peril. I mean, kicking the can down the road is just a Band-Aid on a bigger problem. So what Democrats want to do, obviously, is not the ultimate solution, but it's at Republicans' peril if they don't address this at all. And I know they've talked about possibly addressing it this month, but those people in that in-between that aren't poor enough to be on government insurance and aren't well off enough to, or don't work for a company that supports insurance in some decent fashion and covers a lot of those costs, well, they're just kind of in between, and they're going to go back to having no insurance at all, which ends up with people in, let's say, emergency visits or unplanned hospital visits. Who's paying for all this stuff? And so I think that there really has to be a conversation about how these constituents will be affected when some people went from $85 a month, a social worker I read on Axios, to $750. She's like, I'm just going to get insurance for my 4-year-old and not have any for myself.
Yeah, I mean, I was on the ACA a few years back when I was working for a British company, and my premium was $1,200 a month because I made more than the subsidies would allow. And oh my gosh, it was insane. Like, as a young, healthy person paying $1,200 a month, it's just outrageous.
Yeah, it's pretty impossible. President Trump seemingly giving up the fight to deploy National Guard troops to Democrat-led cities. Let's stick around for that.
President Trump seemingly giving up on his efforts to deploy National Guard troops to Democrat-led cities, at least for now. The president writing on Truth Social, "We are removing the National Guard from Chicago, Los Angeles, and Portland, despite the fact that crime has been greatly reduced by having these great patriots in those cities, and only by that fact. Portland, Los Angeles, and Chicago were gone if it weren't for the federal government stepping in. We will come back, perhaps in a much different and stronger form when crime begins to soar again, only a question of time. It is hard to believe that these Democrat mayors and governors, all of whom are greatly incompetent, would want us to leave, especially considering the great progress that has been made." But the leaders in those cities pushed back on the idea that it was the presence of the troops that was responsible for the drop in crime.
Portland Mayor Keith Wilson's office told the AP in a statement that the city's reduction in crime was due to the efforts of local police and public safety programs. And officials in Chicago echoed that, citing its number of homicides in 2025, the fewest in more than a decade. Each of those deployments was heavily challenged in court, with most resulting in those deployment orders being blocked and a subsequent legal battle. And to hear California Governor Gavin Newsom tell it, Trump just got tired of fighting in court. He wrote on X, "We won in court and forced him to. Trump's rambling. Here is the political version of 'You can't fire me, I quit.'" And Oregon Governor Tina Kotek said in a statement this week that while her office had not received official notification that troops can return home, quote, if President Trump has finally chosen to follow court orders and demobilize our troops, that's a big win for Oregonians and for the rule of law.
Meanwhile, troops will remain on the ground in D.C. after an appeals court paused a lower court's ruling last month that would have ended the deployment. Troops will also remain in Memphis and New Orleans after cooperation from local officials.
I mean, to me, this looks like, I saw the Truth Social posts and Trump was like, we'll be back. But I mean, you went through appellate courts, Supreme Court, like a lot of different decisions that just say, if local leadership doesn't want you there, this is not going to work out. And so I think it's just like, accept the L for President Trump and just say that, maybe a clearer path forward. Because while I can look at DC, I mean, I've lived here in the time before there, for like a second before there was National Guard troops, saw the crime drop, and then saw, National Guard troops start to, well, they're still around, but, it's like a diminished presence in the beginning. But I know that he's been back and forth about whether they pause, how long they stay into the new year. I think that there needs to be a long-standing solution. So seeing military uniformed people on the streets that can apprehend but can't actually really do too much more than that, can't make arrests, we need to figure out what the long-term solution looks like. So while it might deter crime to have the presence there, what about speaking to these mayors and governors and coming up with a long-term plan that may require getting more local, community affiliated people who understand the area and not just pulled from California to come to other cities, police on the ground, or people that can handle, like you said, this Mamdani's proposing, social workers to deal with certain issues, organizations that help get kids off the street that are maybe have no parenting or limited parenting, that have parents that are working 2 and 3 jobs, to not just be in the street with boredom and idle minds for kids sometimes is not a great thing, and community organizations, and figure out how to put all those things in a pot, help governors and mayors and come up with some long-term solutions that actually create better cities and long-lasting results, as opposed to just throwing the National Guard in there and then having the courts tell you this can't stand.
Yeah, I think this was a capitulation from Trump. The results in D.C., Memphis, and New Orleans were pretty clear that it did precipitate a faster crime drop than we saw in the previous year under the Blue City Mayor's policies. One place where we have seen a success story is in Baltimore. They had their lowest homicide rate recorded in almost 50 years. And the reason why is because they brought in a new district attorney who was actually prosecuting crime. He decided to tackle quality of life crimes like carjackings and break-ins and petty theft, and also instituted a mandatory minimum for gun offenses. And so cracking down on those lower level offenses deterred murderers, because often murderers are people who have had multiple offenses prior but were released from the system and allowed to continue living in society. Like in DC, the average murderer has 11 prior offenses before they commit that murder. And so by Baltimore abandoning these progressive criminal justice reforms and instead returning to basic policing and prosecution, they had massive amounts of success. And so I think it's a shame that some of these mayors in places like Los Angeles and Chicago and Portland are rejecting a method that very clearly works in order to try to pretend that they're being compassionate, but they haven't shown any compassion to the victims of those crimes who continue to be victimized when people are released repeatedly after having a super long rap sheet. Just recently in Virginia, in Fairfax County, we have a very progressive prosecutor by the name of Steve Descano. There was an individual who had multiple prior offenses, was released because Descano didn't want to prosecute him, and he ended up killing somebody in Reston. We've had another incident where someone who had multiple priors was assaulting women on a local hiking trail. And so you can see the direct through line from decisions to get soft on crime and someone ultimately committing a heinous offense against the people who are just trying to live and work safely.
I think where the Democrats got it wrong is responding to this as if everything's good, like we have no crime, we don't need the help. I think that what Democrats could have done better with is saying we would like federal help, but not just in the way that President Trump wants to implement it. We take it in conversation to figure out what works best for states. I know that the Republican Party has always been one of propelling and uplifting states to govern themselves, and knows that the same thing that Alabama may need may not be the same thing that New York needs, may not be the same thing that California needs. And so by the president overriding governors and doing what he he did for the last year of his presidency, it goes against the exact pillar of allowing states to govern themselves, especially when mayors and governors in certain cities were saying, we don't want this type of help. And so I think that there is a direct way to address some of the issues that you're talking about and maybe look at ways that are working in places like Baltimore, talk to local officials and see how they can implement some of President Trump's ideas and some of their ideas, but forcing them to take the route that the president sees fit and just forcing the National Guard to be there against their will is totally against the Republican Party's, what has been their agenda historically that I've understood, by just saying, no, federal control of the situation. We're going to just kind of lump together immigration and crime, and we're just going to throw the National Guard there and overrule some of what you guys want in your own states. I mean, they have pushed this idea of autonomy in states, and to do this kind of just goes against all of that.
Yeah, I mean, the Republican Party has changed a lot since Trump came into power, though, and became the most popular person in the party. And one of the things that Republicans recognized is that federalism works in some cases, but not all of them. And crime is one of those issues where the residents of these cities are being victimized due to the policies from the people that sadly were elected. But the reality is that the federal government also has a role in promoting domestic tranquility and public safety, right? They give out massive federal grants to local police departments. They give out grants to fire departments. There is often federal support given for public safety measures. And so I think the thinking that is being advanced by the Republican Party is if you're receiving federal dollars, and they're taking the same approach with education, right? If you get federal money, then the federal government does have some say over what policies you implement. And if the policies that you're implementing are hurting your populace, then it's time for us to step in and try to make sure that those people are safe.
But when you have a result like this, when the courts rule against Trump and you have governors and you have people like Pritzker that all now can look vindicated, then what have we solved with the back and forth? It's almost like, just like when you saw Mamdani go over to the White House and have a dialogue, and people can only say, wow, interesting. I'd love to see what happens with this. Is Mamdani really the boogeyman? Or is there a policy that President Trump will push back on? We'll see what a middle ground looks like, because that's what politics are, right? You're not going to agree with every governor when you're the president. There's Democrat and Republican governors. But what can happen is long-lasting change if there's some kind of coordination and working together. And to me, President Trump's theme throughout this term so far has been skipping over whether it's Congress or local leadership to do what he wants to do. And to me, that's not the most effective way to get things done in a lasting way.
I mean, I agree, but a lot of these governors have also been very clear that they don't want to work with the Trump administration. I mean, J.B. Pritzker is a perfect example. He's been on several television programs comparing the president to Hitler and saying that he's basically implementing the Third Reich. I mean, same with Tim Walz in Minnesota. So when you have someone going on TV accusing you of being a Nazi and saying that they're going to oppose every step of your presidency, what ground is there to be gained?
Well, President Trump just did that with Mamdani, and then they had a great meeting. I mean, he called him every name under the book that you could think of.
Right, but Mamdani was willing to go have that meeting. These other governors haven't expressed any willingness to go to the White House. They say anything Trump does is bad, and we're not going to work with him.
Well, they should work on that.
I agree.
They should work on that, and they should definitely have some dialogue in 2026. We're putting the good vibes out for the new year.
The Supreme Court has a busy year ahead, by the way. What's on the docket is coming up next. Stay with us.
2025 was a big year for the Supreme Court as they considered several challenges to President Trump's agenda, including firing of federal workers, his mass deportation plan, and transgender military ban.
But this year looks to be just as busy for the High Court and even more pivotal for the president. Many of those decisions that were handed down last year were a result of the emergency or shadow docket and were in most cases temporary, while challenges played out in lower courts. But that's set to change this year, with several major challenges to President Trump's agenda making their way onto the High Court's main docket. The High Court is set to rule on everything from tariffs to birthright citizenship to campaign finance and the Voting Rights Act. Those cases could have wide-reaching impacts on Trump's economic and immigration policy, as well as the 2026 midterms. Some other cases to keep an eye on: the court is expected to rule on the legality of bans for transgender athletes in women's sports. The court will also weigh in on a Colorado law on so-called conversion therapy, which critics argue essentially forces counselors to affirm a child's gender dysphoria. And it wouldn't be a Supreme Court docket without the Second Amendment showing up. The court is set to rule on the legality of Hawaii's law prohibiting people from carrying guns on private property without the explicit consent of the owner.
This all comes as poll after poll shows Americans' opinion of the High Court remains near an all-time low. Take a look at these numbers. This is from a Pew Research poll back in September. Only half of Americans hold a favorable opinion of the Supreme Court. Compare that to 5 years prior, 70% had a positive view of the court. The favorability of the court dips even further along party lines. Just 26% of Democrats say they have a favorable view compared to a whopping 71% of Republicans. That could have something to do with how Americans see the ideological makeup of the court. A plurality, 47%, say that they see the court as conservative.
And 44% is middle of the road, which is interesting. Obviously, there is a conservative majority right now. But one thing I find interesting about conversations about the Supreme Court is that in 2024 and 2025, the vast majority of cases were decided either unanimously or, 8-1. And so it kind of cuts against this idea that this was just a very partisan or ideological court. Now, all that being said, we have some big cases coming up this year. Few that I'm keeping an eye on are birthright citizenship, the tariffs, and then these questions about what the ACLU calls gender affirming care.
Yeah, so let's kind of go through them. With birthright citizenship, so my perspective is that this is protected by the 14th Amendment and it should be upheld. It's been upheld for more than a century. A lot of people feel that if you get rid of birthright citizenship, it will cause mass chaos because it will create this permanent underclass of people that have been living here as a citizen. We'll have to now comb through birth certificates to figure out who's allowed, who can stay, who can go. It also, I think, won't stop illegal immigration. It will create actually millions of new illegal immigrants that were born here. And there's also, from what I understand, fewer than 7,500 births out of the 4 million annually are people that came here just to have a baby. And so if we think about the idea that people are just coming to America to have their kids as opposed to coming to America to find freedom or escape something from their home country or whatever migrants come here for, a lot of it is not just to have a baby. And if we think about putting that onus on all the people that have had, so do we go back like 3 generations? If your grandma's grandma came here and had you and was from another country as an illegal migrant, do all 3 generations now have to go back to whatever home country, even though all they've known is America for 3 different generations? I mean, I think that it would just open this unending Pandora's box.
Yeah, my understanding of the executive order that Trump signed was that it actually grandfathered in people who had been granted birthright citizenship previously, but would prevent future cases of people who are not permanent residents or American citizens having children, that those children would not then be granted birthright citizenship. The Wall Street Journal published an article about a month ago about how actually wealthy Chinese people were traveling to U.S. territories and having their kids there so that they could have American citizenship, and that this was perhaps a directive by the Chinese Communist Party to have greater influence over American life and to sort of have that one foot in the United States, which is interesting. So it is definitely something that happens. And the Supreme Court has ruled on the idea of legal permanent residents, what happens to their children, and affirmed that their children are American citizens, but they've never ruled explicitly on illegal immigrants and what the 14th Amendment means for their children. So I think regardless of what the outcome is, this will be very clarifying for everyone who has had questions about this for decades.
And then the other big thing outside of, I know there's a couple of them, but with tariffs, I mean, people have been complaining. I don't know that many reports of loving them, but I mean, some people love them, but the people have been complaining about the tariffs because the idea for tariffs, I think, was honorable, that President Trump wants more dependence on U.S. everything. And so we take the dependence off foreign nations and it comes here. But the long game to reach that goal, if we ever do reach it, requires a lot of what people will call financial trauma in the interim, trying to figure out what's going on. I mean, even Costco is suing the Trump administration because they're saying, listen, we had to pass these costs now down to customers. And if this falls on the Supreme Court and they say that your tariffs are illegal, you owe us money. And so they're waiting to get their payback. And so I also think in these cases, we're going to watch this play out because a lot of people, a lot of countries have bashed the idea of these tariffs. We've created friction with places like Canada, that's one of our best allies, and treated them almost in a way that we treat somebody who's our adversary. So it's created a lot of friction around the world and also in our country with the rising cost of things and how people feel uncomfortable. Even though inflation has dropped, people still feeling uncomfortable day to day trying to get by, and then knowing that the average cost of what they would have got at a Walmart or a Costco has gone up. So I think this is going to be telling and really either prevent or put wind beneath Trump's wing on moving forward with this goal that I think would be awesome to have all U.S. dependence. But is it realistic when every single day at the moment we consume something that may be international, from car parts to groceries? Prices are going to continue to go up while he figures this out.
Yeah, and I don't have any predictions for how the court's going to rule on tariffs. I've talked to various legal scholars, and they all kind of have a different opinion about which way this is going to shake out. The most common that I hear is that they think that the court will maybe grant Trump a partial win, where they allow some of the tariffs to be upheld and others to be struck down. So we'll see what happens with that. I think where Trump went wrong on the tariffs is really things were kind of chaotic in how he was implementing tariffs and then pulling them back. And sure, negotiation processes happen, but I don't think there's been a ton of clarity. And for businesses that are trying to plan out a future in the United States, it's difficult to secure investment or to make the decision to build factories if the tariff policy is changing on a day-to-day basis and you really don't know what the future is going to look like. And I think the tariffs should be targeted and focused on things that are really important for American national security, things like pharmaceuticals, steel. You mentioned auto parts, that's a big one. Just if we go back to looking at, World War II, we had the ability to basically transition all of these factories that were making things in the United States because of the Industrial Revolution and turn them into things that could produce goods for war in the military. And we don't have that capability now. And so I think as we look at an increasingly unstable world with rising geopolitical threats from Russia and China, not having the ability to manufacture things in the United States is a great concern to us.
And then there's a transgender. I know we only have a couple seconds, but you want to kind of sum up your perspective on that one, because that was a big deal for you. We talked about.
Yeah, we have the supposed, I don't call it gender affirming care, I call it sex changes for children, whether or not those bans can be upheld, as well as whether men can participate in women's sports. And then there's this separate case about counseling and whether Christian counselors in Colorado should be required to affirm a child's gender identity, or if they are allowed to try to counsel them to accept the body that they were born in, the sex that they were born as. And right now, the Colorado law doesn't really allow them to do that. So lots to do for the Supreme Court this year.
Yeah, booked and busy, as they say.
Up next, the Washington Monument lit up on New Year's Eve to kick off America's 250th anniversary. We'll be right back after this. President Donald Trump's initiative to commemorate the nation's 250th birthday began on New Year's Eve with illumination of the Washington Monument in the National Mall in D.C. Take a look.
America. The New World. Our nation began not as an idea invented in the minds of men, but as a land discovered. When Christopher Columbus looked west across the endless ocean, he sailed for glory, for gain, and for God.
The 6-part art installation is one of many projects that Trump has planned for the year-long America 250 celebrations.
The White House reposted images from the display on X. Relive all the highlights from the illumination of the Washington Monument as Freedom 250 launched our nation's 250th birthday celebration, they said.
Now, Freedom 250, the organization tasked with overseeing the anniversary project, wrote on X, quote, "From New Year's Eve through January 5th, a 6-night projection mapping spectacle will illuminate the iconic monument, creating a canvas that tells America's story of discovery, expansion, revolution, independence, and innovation." This illumination is the opening signature moment of a year-long series of national events celebrating the triumph of the American spirit. America has a big year. We got a UFC fight happening at the White House. We have the FIFA World Cup at the Times Square. You know that the ball that drops on New Year's Eve is happening again on July 4th, and this is the first time in history.
Oh, wow.
That ball doesn't drop twice. It
No.
happens once. So this is going to break a record because they're going to make it red, white, and blue for the 250th
cool.
anniversary. So a lot of different things. And then there's also been a ton of things that have been proposed by the president, like a Great American State Fair, I'm not sure where they are, or Patriot Games, or Freedom Plane that's inspired by the Freedom Train of the bicentennial era. The only thing that I say, and even though we should celebrate the country, talk about the good and the bad parts of our history, which I think is very important. We're also in a time where a Gallup poll came out right before the end of the year, and it said, 24% of people are satisfied with the direction our country is going in, and 47 say that their current economic conditions are poor. So as we celebrate all of the good things and the American dream that a lot of people from different countries look to us to have, because there is this thing that America has, this magic about it, that a lot of people, makes people want to come here, live here, migrate here, a bunch of things. We still have some inner work to do that has to grapple with the fact that our average American is not really happy.
Yeah, and I mean, that's probably more of a political question than anything else. But I think one of the things that concerns me is we see in younger generations that there is less pride in being an American,
right?
Outside of politics. People don't feel like the country is something to be proud of. They don't feel particularly patriotic. And that's really sad to me. America is still the greatest country in the world, despite whatever issues we may have. And it's a shame that people don't feel that and aren't really grateful to be here. And really excited about what the future may hold. But I hope that this celebration can be separate from politics. And I know, unfortunately, because Trump is in charge of it, that it will inevitably turn political. But this should be an opportunity to just celebrate that our, young nation has made it this far, that we still exist, that we are still a democracy, that we still are very much looked upon as a beacon to the rest of the world. And whatever we can do to, hammer that point home and try to restore some of that national pride, I think is a really great opportunity.
Yeah, and I think that part of that falls on the president's shoulders. I mean, whoever was the president, even if Kamala won, it would be to take the people, and similar to Mamdani's speech that we talked about earlier today, and say the people who didn't vote for me, like he said, I'm still your mayor. I'm still New York's mayor. Well, he's still the country's president. And so it's time to say why people should feel included in this conversation. And that's a big onus for the administration to take on.
I thought the monument illustrations on the monument were really beautiful.
It looked pretty cool.
Yeah, I like that. So hopefully they'll do some more like that. I've had the opportunity to talk to a few of the people on the Freedom 250 project, and they all just seem like they really love America
excited.
And they're really excited about it, which is great to see. Like, they're just people who describe themselves as patriots and they just want to do a good job, and I think that bodes well.
Well, that makes me happy. That does it for us on Rising Live. Look out for more exclusive YouTube content coming your way all day today. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel so you never miss anything from us. And for those of you who like to listen on the go, we're now available anywhere you listen to podcasts. See you later.